Imagine you're a soldier, dug in on a remote Pacific island in 1943. The air is heavy, the jungle is a wall of green, and the only sounds are the drone of insects and the distant crash of waves. Then, a new sound cuts through the air. It starts as a low hum, but it grows into a high-pitched shriek, an unholy scream that seems to tear the very sky apart. You don't know what it is, but you know it's the sound of death on its way. This is the story of the airplane that haunted the nightmares of Japanese soldiers, the Vought F4U Corsair. The story goes that they called it the Whistling Death. But why? What made this one airplane create a sound so terrifying it became a weapon all its own? Section 1. The Pacific Cauldron. By late 1942, the war in the Pacific was a brutal, island-hopping slugfest. For American pilots, the skies were especially deadly. They were locked in a desperate fight with an enemy that seemed almost untouchable, the Mitsubishi A6M-0. The Zero was a marvel of engineering. It was incredibly light, incredibly nimble, and it could outturn and outclimb almost anything the Allies threw at it. Pilots in the tough but sluggish Grumman F4F Wildcat were at a huge disadvantage. Sure, the Wildcat could take a beating, but it couldn't control the fight. A Zero pilot could engage or disappear whenever he wanted, using his plane's agility to get on the Wildcat's tail. The playbook for Wildcat pilots was grim. Never, ever get into a turning fight. You had to use your better diving speed to hit and run. You were always reacting, always on the defensive. The psychological toll was enormous. For months, the Zero built up a myth of invincibility. It was the samurai of the sky. This, combined with highly skilled and battle-hardened pilots, gave the Imperial Japanese Navy a huge edge in the early days of the war. The US military knew this couldn't last. They needed more than just a replacement for the Wildcat. They needed a game-changer. They needed a fighter that could not only survive a tangle with a Zero, but completely dominate it. Back in 1938, the Navy had put out a call for a new, high-performance carrier-based fighter. The demands were steep, almost science fiction for the time. It had to be fast, heavily armed, and have a long range. Several companies sent in designs, but one, from a company called Chance Vought, was like nothing anyone had ever seen. Their answer wasn't just an evolution, it was a revolution. It was a monster. Section 2. An unconventional answer, the birth of the Corsair. The idea behind the F4U Corsair was brutally simple. If you can't be more agile, be overwhelmingly more powerful. Vaught's design team, led by Rex Beisel, decided to build their fighter around the most powerful piston engine on the planet, the Pratt & Whitney R2800 Double Wasp. This thing was an 18-cylinder, air-cooled radial behemoth, churning out a jaw-dropping 2,000 horsepower, nearly double that of the Zero's engine. The R2800 wasn't just an engine. It was a declaration that America would win the air war with raw, brute force. But squeezing this monster engine into a carrier-friendly plane created a huge problem. To turn all that power into thrust, the Corsair needed a massive propeller, over 13 feet in diameter. With a normal wing design, the landing gear would have to be incredibly long and spindly to keep the prop from chewing up the runway. Long gear is weak, heavy, and a nightmare to retract. This one problem led to the Corsair's most famous feature, its inverted gull wing. It was a stroke of genius. By having the wing dip down before angling up, The designers could mount short, beefy landing gear at the lowest point, strong enough to handle the controlled chaos of a carrier landing. As a bonus, that unique W shape actually helped reduce drag. But this clever solution created a new problem. To make everything fit, the cockpit had to be pushed way back on the fuselage. This gave the Corsair its signature, long-nosed, aggressive look, but it also created a terrible blind spot for the pilot, especially during the critical moments of landing. The rest of the plane was built just as tough. It was a stable gun platform designed to take a beating. The initial armament was a terrifying array of 650 caliber M2 Browning machine guns that could rip apart any aircraft of the day. When the prototype first flew on May 29, 1940, it was instantly clear this was something special. By October, it became the first American single-engine fighter to break 400 miles per hour in level flight. On paper, it was the perfect zero killer. But a plane's success isn't just about speed and horsepower. And as the Corsair moved from the drawing board to the flight deck, pilots quickly discovered this powerful beast had a vicious side. Section 3, Forging a Weapon, from Ensign Eliminator to Sweetheart. The Corsair's first carrier trials in late 1942 were, to be frank, a disaster. Test pilots found that trying to land this thing on a moving carrier was terrifying. The first problem was that massive nose. On final approach, the pilot would completely lose sight of the landing signal officer on the deck. They were essentially flying blind for the most crucial part of the landing. Then there was the bounce. The landing gear was so stiff that when the Corsair slammed onto the deck, it didn't absorb the shock. It bounced back into the air like a pogo stick. This would often cause the tailhook to miss the arresting wires, turning the plane into a runaway on a very short runway. But the most dangerous problem was a wicked, unpredictable stall. Because of the massive engine torque, the left wing had a nasty habit of stalling and dropping without warning at low speeds. A pilot's instinct is to slam the throttle forward to get airspeed. In a Corsair, that was a fatal mistake. The sudden surge of power would magnify the torque, flipping the plane violently onto its back. After a string of near disasters, the US Navy made a shocking call. They rejected the Corsair for carrier service. It was just too dangerous. The Navy decided to go with the Grumman F6F Hellcat, a more conventional and forgiving plane that used the same powerful engine. This could have been the end of the Corsair. But the US Marine Corps, operating mostly from land bases, had a different view. They didn't need a plane that was easy to land on a boat. They needed a plane that could win. The Marines gladly took the difficult but powerful fighter. On their makeshift island runways, the Corsair's problems were far more manageable. Still, the plane quickly earned a reputation among its own pilots. They called it the Ensign Eliminator for its nasty habit of killing inexperienced pilots who didn't respect its power. But all the while, engineers from Vought, the Navy, and Britain's Royal Navy were working like crazy to fix its flaws. The British developed a new, curving landing approach that let the pilot keep the landing officer in sight. Vought engineers tweaked the landing gear to reduce the bounce, raised the pilot's seat, and redesigned the canopy for better visibility. And for that deadly wing stall, they came up with a brilliantly simple fix. A small 6-inch metal strip bolted to the front of the right wing. It was just enough to make both wings stall at the same time, making it predictable and manageable. With these fixes, the beast was slowly tamed. By late 1944, the Navy reversed its decision and cleared the Corsair for carrier duty. The pilots who mastered it fell in love with its speed and power, giving it new nicknames like the Sweetheart of the Marianas. They knew that once you got it in the air, you were flying the meanest fighter in the sky, and now it was ready to be unleashed. Section 4. The Whistling Death Unleashed. The name Whistling Death wasn't cooked up by an American PR officer. As the story goes, it came from the Japanese soldiers in the jungles of Guadalcanal and Okinawa. Now, whether Japanese soldiers themselves widely use that specific name is debated by some historians, but the terror inspired by the sound was absolutely real. The source of that unholy shriek was a complete accident. In an effort to make the Corsair as aerodynamic as possible, designers put the oil cooler intakes right in the leading edge of the wing roots, where the gull wing starts to bend. When a Corsair dove at high speed, air rushing into these narrow slots compressed and created a unique, high-pitched whistle. To the men on the ground, it was the unmistakable sound of doom. It became a powerful psychological weapon. The Corsair really came into its own as a devastating fighter bomber. Marine pilots who pioneered close air support tactics would use its speed to dive almost straight down on Japanese positions. For the soldiers below, the first sign of attack wasn't seeing the plane. It was hearing that whistle, building in intensity, seconds before the thunder of the engine and a storm of fire erupted. And what a storm it was! The Corsair's 650 caliber machine guns could spit out over 100 rounds a second, but that was just for starters. Later models could carry up to 4,000 pounds of bombs or 8 5-inch rockets. They could even carry massive Tiny Tim rockets. In later wars, they'd carry napalm, bringing a whole new level of terror to the battlefield. This one-two punch of sound and firepower destroyed enemy morale. Field reports described Japanese troops scrambling for cover the second they heard that shriek. It wasn't just an airplane anymore. It was a ghost in the sky, a phantom whose cry meant your world was about to end. Its reputation was cemented by pilots like Major Gregory Pappy Boyington and his legendary Black Sheep Squadron. They and other Corsair pilots systematically tore apart Japanese air power. The enemy pilots knew it as a formidable blue, bent-winged demon. The soldiers on the ground just knew it by the sound it made. They knew it as the Whistling Death. Section 5. The Apex Predator, Dominance and Statistics. The terror the Corsair inspired was backed up by cold, hard numbers. By the end of World War II, Corsair pilots had shot down 2,140 enemy aircraft, while only 189 Corsairs were lost in air-to-air combat. That's a staggering kill-to-loss ratio of over 11-1, one of the most lopsided of the entire war. The main reason? The Corsair simply outclassed the Japanese Zero. The Zero's lightweight design, its greatest strength, was also its fatal flaw. It had almost no armor and lacked self-sealing fuel tanks. A few hits from the Corsair's 6 machine guns could make a Zero completely disintegrate. Corsair pilots were taught one simple rule: never get into a turning fight with a Zero. They didn't have to. The Corsair was faster, it could outclimb the Zero, and most importantly, it could outdive it. Pilots perfected boom and zoom tactics, dive on a Zero, fire a devastating blast, and then use that speed to climb away and set up another attack. The Corsair dictated the fight, turning the early war's dogfights into a brutal contest of energy and firepower. a fight the Zero could never win. The Corsair's toughness was another key factor. It was built to survive carrier landings, so it could absorb an incredible amount of battle damage and still get its pilot home. Pilots would land planes shot to ribbons, a testament to just how tough they were. As the war went on and Japanese air power faded, Corsairs increasingly focused on supporting ground troops. They flew over 64,000 sorties, and the vast majority of bombs dropped by US fighters in the Pacific came from Corsairs. This ability to switch from air combat to ground attack made it priceless. Beyond the stats, the Corsair is at the center of incredible stories of heroism. During the Korean War, Ensign Jesse L. Brown, the Navy's first African-American pilot, was shot down by ground fire. His wingman, Thomas J. Hudner Jr., saw that Brown was alive, but trapped in the burning wreckage. In a stunning act of bravery, Hudner intentionally crash-landed his own Corsair nearby to try and save his friend. Though he couldn't free Brown, Hudner's actions earned him the Medal of Honor, a story of brotherhood that rose above the brutality of war, made possible by the incredible aircraft they flew. Section 6, an encore in Korea and a lasting legacy. The end of World War II wasn't the end for the Corsair. While other planes were being sent to the scrapyard to make way for the jet age, the Corsair's incredible versatility earned it a distinguished second act. When war broke out in Korea in 1950, the Corsair was called right back to the front line. The main threat now was the sleek, Soviet-built MiG-15 jet. In a straight-up dogfight, the propeller-driven Corsair was outmatched. But its main job in Korea wasn't air-to-air combat. It was close air support. For the soldiers and Marines on the ground, the sight of a bent-winged Corsair was a godsend. It could operate from carriers or primitive airfields, and it could loiter over the battlefield for hours, ready to pounce. It was the flying artillery for the ground troops, responsible for a staggering 82% of all close air support missions in the first 10 months of the war. And even then, the old warbird still had teeth. In 1952, Marine Captain Jesse G. Fulmer was attacked by a MiG-15. In a classic display of skill, the veteran pilot managed to turn the tables and shoot down the jet. It was a stunning achievement, proof that in the right hands, the Corsair was still deadly. The Corsair production line, which started in 1942, amazingly didn't stop until 1953. The final plane off the line was the last piston-engine fighter ever produced in the United States, after a run of over 12 years. They served for decades with air forces around the world. The last combat kills recorded by a Corsair happened as late as 1969, during the Soccer War between El Salvador and Honduras, where Corsairs flew on both sides. The Corsair's incredibly long service life is the ultimate proof of its brilliant design. It was a plane from the 1930s that dominated the 40s, was essential in the 50s, and was still fighting in the 60s. It bridged the gap from props to jets, a classic that simply refused to become obsolete. Conclusion. So in the end, the story of the F4U Corsair is full of contradictions. It was born from a simple idea of brute force, yet required genius-level innovation. It was designed for aircraft carriers, but was at first rejected for being too dangerous. It was the ensign eliminator that became the sweetheart to the pilots who finally tamed it. And of course, in the pursuit of the perfect weapon, its designers accidentally created an instrument of pure psychological terror. That high-pitched shriek became a sound as famous and as feared as its 6 machine guns. The Whistling Death wasn't just a nickname, it was a reputation earned in the skies over the Pacific and the mountains of Korea. It was the sound of a new kind of war, where the elegant dogfights of the past were replaced by overwhelming industrial might. The Corsair was more than just a plane with an 11-1 kill ratio. It was a symbol of a turning tide, a rugged, dominant, and timeless weapon of war that carved out a legacy that few aircraft will ever match. If you enjoyed this look at the legendary F4U Corsair, go ahead and hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. We've got plenty more stories from aviation and military history coming your way. And let us know in the comments what other iconic machines you want to see us cover next. Thanks for watching.